folks, welcome. Left Reckoning episode 30. I always like that numerologically. 30 is great. Good
30
vibes
feels
for
very
30.
nice.
Yeah. That's a good like number you want if you're picking basketball jerseys, I feel like.
Yeah, that's true.
Tonight, talking unions versus climate catastrophe with Ryan Pollock. Also, be talking about Nina's loss, sad day. Joe Biden's use of the CDC to conditionally extend the eviction moratorium. And we'll also be naming a new bum steer after some new reported that I found very amusing to read about Tim Pool. Tim Pool is this week's bum steer. So we'll be getting into that and more on this Wednesday's edition of Left Reckoning. David, how are you?
I'm doing all right. I mean, I'm still pretty sad, obviously, about the loss for Nina in Ohio, but I'm happy for the victory of kind of more grassroots, more oppositional politics regarding Cori Bush and the Biden administration getting that extension of the eviction moratorium. It's not everything that we want. It's not perfect, but these are those kind of cracks, and you have to be able to take the good with the bad sometimes.
Yeah, so what happened? Let's play actually some. Actually, before we get to Joe, oh, here it is, right here. Yeah. So let me share this because we want to be comforted by our commander in chief here.
Jesus Christ.
And then we'll criticize kind of the process this is being done by and how that could be improved by a party that actually genuinely had a problem with evictions.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to stop sharing from this screen. There we go. Okay.
Administration is about to announce a new partial eviction moratorium, COVID-related. Can you tell us any more about that, and are you sure it's going to pass Supreme Court muster?
The answer is twofold. One, I've sought out constitutional scholars to determine what is the best possibility that would come from executive action or the CDC's judgment. What could they do that was most likely to pass muster constitutionally? The bulk of the constitutional scholarship says that it's not likely to pass constitutional muster, number one. But there are several key scholars who think that it may, and it's worth the effort. But
can you imagine Trump starting something like this about like the Muslim ban? Like, a lot of people say you can't do this, but I found a single whack job at the American Heritage Foundation or whatever the hell that said I can, so I'm going to go for it, which is like basically the truth. Mm-hmm. Biden basically does. Okay, I'll continue on.
Present, you could not. The court's already ruled on the present eviction moratorium. So I think what you're going to see, and I want to make it clear. I told you I would not tell the Justice Department or the medical experts or scientists what they should say or do. So I don't want to get ahead. The CDC has to make this. I asked the CDC to go back and consider other options that may be available to them. You're going to hear from them what those other options are. I have been informed they're about to make a judgment as to potential other options. Whether that option will pass constitutional measure with this administration, I can't tell you. I don't know. There are a few scholars who say it will, and others who say it's not likely to. But at a minimum, by the time it gets litigated, it will probably give some additional time while we're getting that $45 billion out to people who are, in fact, behind in the rent and don't have the money.
Right.
I'm sorry. It's just like, this is just still so despicable on his end. I mean, it was despicable that it even got to this position in the first place. And I know we need to break this down for everybody, but I do just want to make a quick comment on what Biden says right there, right? Because so he talks to some, incredible constitutional scholar who tells him, hey, this might get, blocked in the courts. This might be a legal challenge, but it's worth doing anyway, right? And that's what convinced Biden, right? He could have done that 2 weeks ago. You don't have
That's
to
what he
talk to a
should have
legal
done.
scholar. You just say it's like, okay, well, the threat is that Brett Kavanaugh and this undemocratic body, the Supreme Court, is going to try to prevent Americans from having just basic protections in the middle of a pandemic, right? And then we're going to have to go into a legal battle with the Supreme Court over this, right? Any politician worth their salt understands that in that meantime you can provide people with relief, and it's so frustrating to sit here and watch him act like this, especially given I mean, you know, all these people talk about Biden's ego right now. He does want to be a transformational president, style himself in the FDR style. That is the least FDR answer I could imagine on a question like that, right? You say like, we're willing to fight this, we think we're right, that's it, right? What the hell is that?
Yeah, I mean, just to outline this, because we know we want to take our shots at the Supreme Court to the extent we can.
Yeah.
Brett Kavanaugh, like a month ago, basically inserted into a decision, not even in the main decision, but like as a footnote saying, by the way, if this happens again, I'm going to need to see a little bit more, you know, proof of your work, basically, right? And so what we have now is Biden didn't just, when we hear this 90% number, that is not including places where the virus isn't actively mass spreading, is my understanding of the condition. So people can get evicted there just fine, even though like maybe the spread's going to be right around the corner in like a couple weeks, and all of a sudden, right? We obviously know that. And as you know, David, we were talking about like people, it's not like landlords were going to wait around to see what was going to happen with the fallout of this. When that moratorium lifted, they are evicting people. So people have been
evicted. There are people today that lost their homes yesterday.
And so that Biden could have just had the CDC done this whole thing where we don't know, the scholars, whatever. First of all, shut up about that. Leave that for the like lawyers. But second of all, do it right away and then make it get tied up in the courts, right? Like, of course, just do that initially. And here's the other problem. It doesn't need to be the court's decision. In fact, we shouldn't be, especially when Democrats control all three branches. Well, sorry, I don't want to say that. The House, the Senate, and the presidency. Of course, they don't control the Supreme Court. But there's right now HR 4791, the Protecting Renters from Evictions Act, which I believe would extend the moratorium to the end of the year. And who knows even if we're going to be done with this variant stuff by then. But, you know, there's a framework there. And Biden doesn't say, well, we can do this, right? And he's not banging the drum for that, because ultimately there are Democrats that don't want that. They want this moratorium to expire. They want this system where it's like, okay, we have this thing where it's like, we've allocated all this money for renters behind on their rent, but it's not there, right? Well, figure that out, and then maybe we can, I mean, I'm not going to be there, but you can talk about lifting an eviction ban or moratorium, right? But you can't just be like, well, the money's there. It's the states. You fucking knew that these are the states you're working with, right? These are the states you ran for president in.
That's the thing that's so frustrating about all these excuses that you get from the Democratic Party on this question, right? And it's the most classic playbook for them. Oh, well, we want to do this mightily popular thing, this thing that's common sense. It's just basic humanity stuff, right? But the system, it doesn't work like that. Or also we can't figure out how to deal with the states. No, as Matt said, you recognize when you're putting these kind of solutions forward that are going to have to go through the states, right? What kind of a hurdle that will be. And you also recognize what the role of the Supreme Court is. Like, the thing that's frustrating to me about them is they always act like, oh, well, this is a new consideration we'd never thought about before, that we could sort of stand up against the Supreme Court, or that we could try to pressure states into using the funding that's out there to make sure that people don't get kicked out of their homes, right? It's always like, oh, well, we didn't expect this. It's like, yes, you did. And I just want to just one more time outline very clearly to people what happened with the eviction moratorium previous to this push and change from the Biden administration, right? Yes, so you have Kavanaugh, who basically says he will block it if it goes forward. Again, if you need another reminder about how evil and sick the Supreme Court is, how this is not an organization that's there to protect the minority from the tyranny of the majority, I don't know how to help you. But on top of this is affecting millions of people. It was estimated around 4.3 to 6 million people were threatened with losing their homes. Biden waited until the last 3 days, 3 days before it expires, to start talking about it, right? And it's amazing that it got to that place. there in the first place. But before we get to the Biden administration and Cori Bush's successful move, you got to remember what Pelosi's role in this is, and the House Democrats' role. From the reporting that was coming out, right? This was Ro Khanna was saying this. We were getting this information trickling out. House Democrats were being told by the party to hold off on doing something about the eviction moratorium until they get guidance from the White House. That's BS, right? And beyond it being BS, it's a great example that despite all these things that Biden and Pelosi are talking about, they knew that this was a problem. They knew that this was upcoming. And they were making a decision.
Sorry, but just like whoops, we accidentally did what the landlord lobby wanted us to do.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's just, yeah. What an unfortunate thing. How did that happen?
Austin Powers, like, I fell over when he is, yeah.
And obviously they did it in this way because, as Matt was just saying, they wanted to reward and stand up for their constituency, which is the real estate lobby, which is wealthy people, which is people who own homes and get income from renting to other people, right? That's who the Democratic Party is worried about. They knew this would be unpopular, is the thing. Obviously, Nancy Pelosi is not going to go up there and say, like, oh, we support throwing 6 million people out onto the street. But they also knew that that's what they wanted to do.
Yes.
So they've tried to find a way to run out the clock and then act like there was nothing else possible. And just as a last thing, procedurally, too, so we have all this information that House Democrats were under the impression that they were supposed to be getting guidance from the White House on what to do. When Pelosi chose to hold a unanimous consent vote, right? And that's what happened on the eviction moratorium in the House. Why did she do that? Well, a unanimous consent vote means that it only takes, somebody to be like, no. Right? Which, of course, you're going to get Republicans to do that. Well, why did Nancy Pelosi, who apparently is fighting for the American people, the American renter, decide to use that tactic to try to push this forward? It was because she wanted to shield members of the Democratic Party who also wanted the eviction moratorium to end. And they wanted to make sure that they were not going to be the subject of attacks from progressives and leftists, right? Again, they knew this would be unpopular, and they try to find a way to get away with it. It's one of the most clear examples of how the Democratic Party functions and operates is right there.
Yeah, and just to kind of explain why, they're trying to get this is honestly what my strongest argument for liking that they have, the House, Senate, and presidency is because it puts them in positions where they can't avoid it, right? Like the real estate lobby, they need it. And they can't elaborate it because when you elaborate it looks something like this. This is Jeremiah Johnson. He is the founder of the @neoliberal Twitter account, which is unashamedly neoliberal. And he writes, extending the eviction moratorium is a bad idea. It can't go on forever as much as DSA would like it to. I like that it's only like DSA members who want the eviction moratorium to continue. Evictions are unhappy things, but they serve a socially useful purpose, and housing markets don't work well without them. He's right about that. I mean, that's not the socially useful purpose part, but the housing markets part.
Yeah. No, I just want to say, if evictions are a socially important part of like how your housing system works in your society, then you have a fucked up society. Yes. Like that's it, right? Yeah. Like if you're saying, oh, this horrible thing that we have to do to maintain the system, right? It's necessary to maintain the system. Yeah, Bubba, that's why we're against the system. That's why the system is bad.
Yeah. Do hunger and the labor market next, right? Like, yeah, it is. I don't know. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but if you look at the neoliberal headshots on their website, it's funny. It's very funny.
I mean, those people are just horrible. I mean, they spend their time making excuses for the inexcusable. But before we, because we want to get to this Nina stuff, but I did want to make sure that we took a moment and clearly stated, thank you to Cori Bush and all the people who did this. This is an example of how electing socialists, and remember, Cori Bush, compared to even the rest of the members of the squad, is much more active and engaged as a member of the Democratic Socialists of America than I would argue most of the other people in the squad or in that periphery are, right? Her using her abilities as an organizer, her decision to make sure that this did not die, were serious. And there were a lot of people, there were a lot of haters out there who were saying, well, oh, this is too little too late. Why didn't you do something beforehand? Well, she had been. right? And she had been trying to use all the procedural things that she had at her disposal. You're very, it could be very certain to say that she was one of these people who internally was pushing back against this idea that we need to wait for guidance. She had been fighting for this when the threat that it was going to expire became apparent. Right. And and I just want to say, like, her doing this was successful because, as Matt and I were just saying, the Democratic Party knew that this was unpopular, but they wanted to come up with an excuse. And having somebody in that organization, in that party, publicly come out there and say, no, Biden could be doing something, Pelosi could be doing something, there needs to be a solution to this problem, is great. And I think Malika does it well in this thread too.
Yeah.
I just think it's absolutely critical. Like, Matt and I have a lot of criticisms of the squad. We certainly have a lot of criticisms of AOC in particular, and we talk about them a lot on this show. But we have to have, and especially if you're a socialist watching this, you have to have that kind of ability to dance with the contradictions, to understand the dialectics of these things, right? That yes, the Democratic Party is a nightmare. Is not our party. And we'll get into that in a little bit.
Yeah. More on that later.
But we can utilize these things, and we can find ways to infiltrate and to have power and to flex that. And when you can do that, that's helpful. That helped people. That helped millions of people. It's not the end all be all, but that was a meaningful moment that came out of social victories that preceded it. Right, Cori Bush is elected to Congress off of the backs of along with everybody. I don't want to make it seem like she rode anybody's coattails, right? But she was a product of the movements, of the social movements, which allowed us to actually have some ability to flex our muscle. It's not the kind of block that we need to be doing what we want to do on a mass scale, but boy, it can prevent the Democrats from being able to just hand over something monstrous to the real estate lobby.
Yeah, and it's. Yeah, I think. Well, let's move on now. I think. Because these are very related conversations, though.
No, I think they are. No, this is going to go up on later as one segment because this is the kind of the dance of what this party is. And I think if you want to sort of break down for folks, and no people know the bad news, Nina lost. But how do we understand this? What happened there?
Yeah, so I mean, I like to focus on the money and what that shows about this party, just for this conversation. So this went around. Mark Pocan, I think was who I originally saw tweeted out. But this is a graph of the outside money that went into this primary here, and you'll notice. I mean, one really dwarfs everything else, but there's more to talk about than just that. This is the Democratic Majority for Israel PAC. That is the Greens spending about 1.2 million opposing Turner, and we'll get to an example of that in just a little bit. And then another looks like 700,000 to support Brown. Also, you'll notice over here, Third Way. So those guys getting involved with it.
Throwback, baby.
In second place there with a complete. I mean, David, explain to folks what Third Way is. Are they like good guys?
Oh no, I mean Third Way are pretty nasty folk. I mean, it's a think tank in DC and PAC now as well that makes the argument that the Third Way, some kind of synthesis between left and right politics, basically centrist politics, are the way forward. That's how you get efficient government, and they're absolute monsters. And even though they act like they're just ideologues, or ideologues in the sense of like, oh, they have an idea about society, truly. What they represent is complete capitulation to the ruling elites, the real estate lobby, etc. And I'll tell you, as having lived in DC for a little while, they also produce some of the most boring people you will ever meet.
Sorry, I'm back. I did swallow.
That's 9 over there.
But let's just go into one of these mailers as I try to compose myself here.
Yeah.
This is one of these opposed Turner things. And there's a lot
These
of
are so terrible.
As I clear my eyes here, there's a lot of concern, and we'll get into some of it for why it's well founded, but I think a little bit overcorrection on our policies aren't winners.
Mm-hmm.
I want to show some of the nature of this propaganda. The Democratic majority for Israel has been putting out, which, by the way, Ben Burgess had a good point. If there was a Republican majority for Russia, MSNBC would have an interesting take on it. But
yeah,
here is the new DMFI mailer tries to suggest Nina Turner is against raising the minimum wage and universal healthcare.
Just so cynical.
Like the worst kind of like mendacious lies.
Yeah.
And you know, I, I guess were you gonna jump in there, David?
Oh, I mean, it's despicable, and the just so we can talk to everybody listening too, from all the different criticisms of Nina and the race. You know, for some people who wanted Nina to take, for example, like a more militant approach. I mean, the reason that they had these kind of, that's a cynical take. There's no doubt about that, right? But where the origin of that lie is Nina basically standing up against the DNC, right? And they're basically saying because Nina had issues with what the DNC platform was because it wasn't radical enough, it didn't go far enough for fighting for working people, it's filled with compromises. Oh, that means that she actually, is against all like her hallmark policies, right? And I just wanted to note that it's just like it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't thing, right? Because they're just going to lie like crazy about you, and you can be very militant, and they're going to use that as as more arrows in their quiver.
Yeah, and I mean, nonetheless, I think one of the major things is the suburb versus urban divide. That I think, I mean, that's because there's a lot of different factors, right? Like, I think we mentioned before, I don't want to talk about, should Nina have said Joe Biden's a piece of shit or not? Like, I think she did, and then she still tried to run as a Democrat, and that is going to be actionable for certain people. And I think it is disappointing, and this is the problem with the Democrats, particularly as they'd say things like, we're just going to fight voter suppression without organizing, is like they're cool with the suburban electorate. I mean, they literally were saying that prior to 2016, that we're gonna, like, who cares about the Rust Belt? We're gonna win the suburbs, and that's basically like, I think what Biden wants, and like that's the thing is like, so we wonder why we can't get the Democrats to even really talk about this Protecting Renters from Eviction Act. It's because there's a lot of Democrats. Like, what do you think Third Way's position on evictions is?
Yeah,
right. It's the exact same as our friend from Neoliberal,
Chantal
right?
Brown.
Well, that's what I'm saying, right? Like she's going to be there. She's there. The Democratic majority for Israel, who like loves to spend money against Ilhan and troll her about, bullshit. Like they're giving her money so that when the next incident like that comes up, she can be there saying we need to stand with Israel, and they have security issues. And then Third Way's there so she can be one of these people like, oh, sorry, we couldn't get to it. We couldn't get to it, and we got to think of the small property owners too.
Yeah. And I think that really gets down to it. I think, there can be conversations about the actual on the ground campaigning and things like that. But the fact is that a lot of outside money comes in at the end and completely changes the race. Also, a lot of politicians like Hillary Clinton and James Clyburn come in and get involved in a race that they never would be getting in for any other reason, but they recognize that this is a proxy fight for them to defeat their political rivals.
Yeah, and there's a tweet here by Alex Salmon, and I want to share this too because this really Clyburn. I mean, really, fuck Jim Clyburn. I mean, don't say that if you're going to run as a Democrat. But as somebody who's not going to, Alex Salmon, who does really great work. There's no way this is. So here's this tweet. This is Clyburn saying like Killer Mike saying something about him, call him stupid. Got him to endorse in this race. I was gonna stay right here in South Carolina minding my business till I got called stupid, Clyburn told me. With Chantal Brown's win in Ohio, he's showing liberals he has a finger on the pulse of Dem politics in a way they must acknowledge. And Alex Sam says, there's no way this is remotely true, but it's interesting that Clyburn thinks, quote, all of Democratic politics is a petty personal grudge match once some rapper says something mean about it is the more charming explanation.
And I mean, that is a good insight. I mean, but what else is there for the Democratic Party, like as their kind of base, as like the actual structure of the Democratic Party, Democratic politicians, then personal petty grievance politics, right? Because it's not about materially benefiting people. It's not about fighting for folks. It's about making sure that your coalition, your people stay in power, and that your position's not threatened at all, right? So it's just not surprising at all that Clyburn is going to jump, cannonball into this race. Um, I don't know because but that's the reality, right?
Yeah.
And I have some things to say. I want to say about the party in general, but before we get there, I just wanted to note that, like, they came in with money. You could always have expected that, and the money certainly can be a problem, but the campaign galvanized a lot of folks. You look at the breakdowns, and it's a very clear breakdown. Working class communities of color were showing up for Turner. Wealthy suburbs were showing up for her opponent. And that's the kind of breakdown of what the Democratic Party is. And I think using the term crossroads would be incorrect, because, the stream's going one way, right? They control that party. And we have to recognize the disadvantage.
This is where they've been marching for decades, when Bill Clinton was like, could only dream of the Lolita Express, right?
And like, we have our armies of volunteers and people who will phone bank, but they have institutional power and institutional support that just doesn't exist for progressives. And it's just tough because sometimes you get these takes from folks. It's like, well, if we only had people running with this kind of character or like these kind of like personal abilities, then we win every time. And I don't want to say that the results were necessarily like inevitable, but I think that it does show that there are a lot of places where the Democratic Party does still have a stranglehold.
Yeah, the suburbs. I mean,
and the suburbs. And maybe let me just get to this, because I think this is a real moment that we're in right now as a left in the U.S. Right, post Bernie, it's a tough time. People were looking for a win. That was one that was really needed, and especially at a moment when you are seeing people like Cori Bush trying to use more of that political leverage that they have. You would have wanted someone else to join the ranks, right? And if anything, not somebody who's just the complete opposite political perspective that people who support the Bernie Sanders campaign were. But I want to make this point really clear, because there's a lot of division going on right now amongst the socialist left regarding the Democratic Party and all of these other things. And I just want to remind people of a couple things. One, it's not your party. It just isn't. The Democratic Party is not your party. It's not a party for working people. That's it. And you shouldn't want it to be either, right? We need to be doing something different, right? And I really, really do worry sometimes that we just haven't gone through this debate properly. We haven't done the political education on not just the party form in general in like an abstract kind of way. We haven't really had a meaningful debate that led to a deeper understanding of what the Democratic Party is. We haven't built that understanding on a mass scale, right? We have a lot of conversations about it. We have a lot of yelling about it. You get a lot of moralizing about it. You have one side, that's like very much like worried about like the purity of your soul, right? If you interact with the Democratic Party, your soul has been tainted by it, right? And I think that a lot of people on that side, they haven't had a proper wrestling with the needed political development, what is needed for any kind of political alternative to rise up, right? That means that we have to open up space. And winning these kind of elections opens up space. Giving people hope and the idea that something different is possible opens up space. Producing people like Cori Bush, that opens up space, right? Yes, the Democratic Party, absolutely, as the slogan goes, is the graveyard of social movements, right? But that's a truism, right? There's a truism about it. It's not a deep enough analysis. The Bernie Sanders campaign was a massively important social change. It massively changed the game for working class politics in this country. You have to be able to wrestle with that. You have to think about it dialectically. Yes, the Democratic Party is bad. It's not ours. It represents the interests of the ruling elite, right? But we have to also understand that there have been lasting benefits that have come from recognizing that, but not just sitting on the sidelines, right? Now, but I don't want to sound too middle of the road here, but I also want to say that on the other side, I think that there are some people who have had no qualms with, democratic socialist interventions within the Democratic Party, right? And I think they need to do a lot of soul searching as well, because while so much of the focus has been on trying to get some folks a nuanced perspective about what we can achieve, regarding the Democratic Party and how we can benefit. I think there is also a group on the left that has become blind to what the Democratic Party is. It's not corrupted. It hasn't lost its way. It's the political articulation of certain sections of the ruling class, right? We see that all the time. You can see who the party answers to. You see it right there. It's not working class people or marginalized folks, no matter how much of the branding tells you that that's what they represent, right? It represents a section of the ruling class that, for historical, geographical reasons, recognizes, okay, well, this is the party that's in power. So this is the party that we need to interact with and play with. And then also a section of the ruling class that says, okay, well, capitalism is a very cruel form, but I very much benefit from it. But I would like it if, we could just sort of tamp down some of the worst egregious aspects of it. And I want to feel better about myself, right? I don't want to get those people power, right? But I think that we could just be a little bit less explicit on how we're hurting them, right? Look, that is what that party is. And, they want to present themselves as like a progressive face of capitalism, the more humane version of an inhumane system, a system of profit. I just think that some on our side who genuinely do want a better future, they don't fall into that category, obviously. They disagree with the interests of the ruling class that I just outlined. They fall into this trap that by focusing on the group that, has a criticism of the Democratic Party that has like overtaken their ability to engage in politics properly, that they've fallen into the trap because basically doing sloppy analysis and think that we're going to get this big break. It's going to come through some sustained period of liberal rule. Mm-hmm. It's just not going to happen. Yeah. They got the institutions, they got the organizations, they got the money, the people to call to get the spin that they want. It doesn't mean that we can't win, but you have to understand the arenas that we're fighting in for your home, and where your home turf is. And, when you're not making those realizations, you're making a big mistake. They're going to fight us. And I don't just mean the Democrats. I mean that whole class of bosses and rich people. Yeah. They're going to fight us with everything that they have. So we have to remember the advantages that we have. We have our spawn, the point of production. We have our necessary role in production. That means that the lights turn on every day, that there's food on the shelves. We do that. That's our power. But people are very alienated and they don't recognize that, right? We have to find ways to organize to be able to use that power, both as voters and, when we're called upon to, do election stuff, but most importantly in the workplace, in the community, in your neighborhood. We got a hell of a lot of work to do. And it's going to take a host of different tactics, sometimes making nice, right? More often fighting against those who oppress us. But we need to know where we stand, know our chances, and know the ground that we stand on. Losing is going to happen. It's okay. I think, just so it's very clear, I think that campaign, it's a good campaign, right? That was a fight that needed to happen, right? I'm not saying we sit that one out, but when we're doing this analysis, okay, what does this mean for the movement, blah, 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 right? You have to recognize, okay, with the Democratic Party, they control that party. That's their institution, right? And they're going to protect it with everything that they have. We can find ways to beat them, but if we don't recognize our role in this, we're going to get really, really lost and continue to fragment. And even worse than that is the splitting off of the left that I think has happened because people don't wrestle with that question in good faith. Sorry for going on a rant, but I just saw immediately you had on one side people blaming the movement for the People's Party, which is not an organization that I like, right? But they had nothing to do with that loss, right? And then you had people on that side saying, well, this proves exactly what we've been saying, that you can never win an election. That's not true either, right? There's a lot of soul searching that needs to be done.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And, it reminds me of, remember when Chapo got in trouble for saying the bend the knee comment?
Yeah.
Ultimately, like that is like, or I remember Matt Brunig also saying like the hostile takeover model, and like Nina Tandon getting upset about that. And it's like, that's ultimately right. Like you have to think of the party that way. It's not something you're going to redeem and make work. That's the thing, is just like this FDR 2.0 stuff.
Oh, we don't want that. I mean, like, don't get me wrong. It'd be great to have somebody who's doing that, but like, we want to do something completely different from that as well.
Right. Yes. Agree. Yeah. And like, that's never been done again. And there's a reason for it. Like even that much, right? Like within the Democratic Party.
It was too dangerous. I mean, that opened up a lot of opportunities.
Yeah.
The FDR, I don't know. I just, this is one of those things too. I know we have a lot to get to tonight, so so maybe put a pin in it, but this is one of those things too, like, this is why political education is critically important for organizations, because we have to know what we're doing too, and not just like what we're supposed to do, if that makes sense, right? Like, don't just be somebody who just accepts marching orders from your organizational superiors. Like, we need to be arming ourselves with the knowledge to understand what our strategies and tactics are. And I think that there is a loss right now, and I think a lot of the splintering that we see from folks who say like, oh, I'm a progressive or I'm a socialist, right, I want to fight for these things, do come from this kind of fundamental like misunderstanding, and that's what happens when you lack political education on a mass scale.
Well, where should we go next? Should we do a plug?
Yeah, let's do a plug. I mean,
friend of
Matt
show. Well, I'll just go quick. Friend of show,
Yeah.
Cori Pine, will be joining us.
UFOs.
We'll be talking. He's gonna scold me a little bit for my closed-mindedness about UFOs. Cori is the one person who I will listen to on this stuff. We'll also be talking maybe a little bit of right-wing stuff. I mean, if you go back into the TMBS archives, those Cori shows are all fantastic. Yeah. He's a smart guy. So that will be for patrons this weekend, probably released on Sunday. Got Cori Pine, and we did Think Tank earlier this week. So yeah, what else, David?
I mean, I think that's up for upcoming things, and people who are listening and like this show, like what we're able to cover. I mean, later in the show, we're going to do another in-depth look at maybe a potential second chance in Alabama. We're going to be giving out an update on Peru, and we got some Tim Pool stuff as well. But if you like the show and you think it's sort of fitting into an important, hole in the left movement, the support really goes a long way, especially in helping us try to expand. So please consider supporting the show at patreon.com/leftreckoning. We really appreciate all the people who've been supporting us so far, and onward to more. It's been a really exciting 30 shows.
Yeah, please subscribe, folks. Do you want to introduce this interview at all?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it needs too much introduction, but we're going to be talking in a minute with Ryan Pollock, who is a lead organizer here in Austin, Texas, with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and we're going to be talking about labor and climate change and that fight, and how critical getting a just transition, moving that from just like a slogan, but to something that actually has some meat on its bones, will be. Ryan is the real deal. He's one of those people who's out there every day fighting the good fight to make sure that working people have a better future. And I think that it's important, especially in questions of climate change, that we start to begin our analysis from the labor question. So hope you all enjoy the conversation.
All right, folks, we'll be back in about a half hour with more, including my dive into Tim Pool's shitty
dive into the pool
right-wing laundry service. Here we go.
Welcome back, everybody, to Left Reckoning. David Griscom, joined as always by Matt Leck. And today we're really honored to be joined by Ryan Pollock. I talked to him a little over a year ago on TMBS. So I'm really happy to have you joining us today, Ryan, on Left Reckoning.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Ryan is an incredible union organizer here in Texas. He's the local organizer for our local IBEW here in Austin, Texas. He's done incredible work advocating for a kind of serious addressing of climate change that takes labor seriously instead of just kind of general sloganeering. I wanted to bring him on to talk about this report that just came out, which was a kind of collaboration between the AFL-CIO, a bunch of labor organizers here in Texas, and Cornell University. The report is called Combating Climate Change, Reversing Inequality, a Climate Jobs Program for Texas. And we'll put some links in the show notes for people to be able to find it. But it paints a really interesting picture, both kind of on a practical level of how to address climate change, but also on a labor level of how we get there. But before we get too much further into it, I was wondering if, Ryan, if you could just sort of, explain what this project was, what this report is, and all the people who were sort of engaged in it.
Yeah, so the Texas AFL-CIO saw that there was a real dialogue that we needed to have on this in labor in Texas, because we were really starting to butt heads, and some people were starting to pull apart. And so they wanted to bring us together, and then also bring in Laura Skinner and Mijin Cha from the Worker Institute at Cornell to help us build this report. They did a lot of work with the New York Climate Jobs Project, which was a big success. And this way we could help put some numbers behind all the things that we were saying, and paint a picture of what we could be doing and what the future could look like for labor. Because we know these jobs are coming. We know that fossil fuels are on their way out, no matter what we do. And so we want to help workers, and we want to organize the green sector, the entire green economy. And in order to do that, we need to paint a picture of what that's going to look like, the possibilities, and say, like, listen, this isn't going to suck. It's not just we're not trying to take away your cows and tell you can't get on an airplane. And we're not just trying to take away your jobs and shut down your factories like, a lot of environmentalist groups do. We're coming at this from the perspective of labor. My own union is heavily involved in almost every part of what's going to be affected here, both the jobs that are being lost and the jobs being created. So I ended up getting involved because I'd already started doing some work on this, and I'd already been thinking about this in the first place, but also a lot just because I happen to be in a union that is going to be so incredibly affected by this.
Yeah, and I think why this report is exciting, and I think this kind of shift is going to be really critical if we really want to do something about it, is recognizing one, somebody needs to do this stuff, right? And the way that it's done really does matter. I think sometimes, especially environmentalists, like, they don't recognize, for example, what the problems that could come about in a highly ununionized, green sector, right? That's one kind of fear, even especially with like solar panels, right? Is that there's a lot of opportunities for some people to tell to make a lot of money and not really help out the working people. But before we get into all of that and the just transition, I was just sort of wanting to lay out the report for folks. A few things I really like about it is, one, it starts out talking about the kind of recommendations for jobs that they would like to see in the state. Talking about the things that you expect a climate change proposal to talk about: solar, wind energy, geothermal, etc. But it really talks also about inequality in the state of Texas, and uses this as a kind of springboard to address a lot of these communities that have been left behind. It's no real mystery, I think, to most people living in Texas that something's going on. People just survived a pretty horrific, winter storm that not only was extreme, but it affected our electrical grid in a way that I think it's hard to sort of put the genie back into the bottle there. Could you just sort of talk about why you find that the points about inequality and racial justice are really important in sort of framing the way that people in Texas and across the country think about climate change?
Yeah, Texas is the South. We have that history of racism, of segregation, Jim Crow that still permeates everything. I talk about this in my organizing conversations a lot when I'm trying to explain, like, why things are the way things are in Texas. We've got a lot of people moving from out of state, like California and all that. And they don't think about that history, and they'll say, like, well, why are the wages so much lower for electricians here? I'm like, well, Texas hates working people, and it's a right to work state. We have that whole history, and just like, we've never had that establishment of strong labor unions, and it's labor unions that help us get those good jobs and kind of balance the scales, and it's not a perfect system, but it does give us a bit more power, and other communities with people who don't look like me a bit more power, and it's still far from perfect, but it's the best we've been able to come up with so far.
Yeah, and the thing that's really exciting, and I had said that we'd talk about this later, but we should just get into it right now. The thing that is really critical about, pushing for green jobs in this economy, making sure that they're unionized and they have these protections. It's like this is going to employ a lot of people, if we do it right. And in a state that does have, horrendous minimum wage jobs, does have horrendous protections for people on the work site, being able to leverage, space in the economy in this way and say like, okay, we're going to make a decision as a community, as a society, as a state, as a country, to basically encourage this kind of growth, green growth. That also means that we can touch on a lot of things that have been sort of left behind, as you were mentioning, right? Communities that have been sort of ignored for a long time. Could you just remind folks how critical it is to make sure that all of these jobs that we're creating are going to be union jobs, and also the ways that we can, and the report sort of outlines this too, the ways that we can create kind of protections for workers that we hope would sort of trickle down into other industries as well?
Yeah. I mean, you got to think about, why are we doing this in the first place? Like, why do we care so much about, having a healthy environment and one that isn't killing people? It's to create a better future. And if by, stopping that pollution and stopping climate change, or slowing it, or whatever the best we can do is, if that means lowering our conditions drastically and, lowering our standard of living drastically, like, what good is that? Is that a brighter future for people, like, especially communities who are already feeling the brunt of this and have been for generations? We can have a better, brighter future for everybody and have it be green, So in order to, even people who have good conditions right now, it's a lot of thing that scares them in making that jump in like, say, moving them from working in a fossil fuel power plant into operating or maintaining wind farms and solar farms, is that right now those jobs in the green tech aren't that good. They have very comfortable, high paying jobs in the fossil fuel industry. They don't have anything that comes anywhere close to that in the green economy right now.
Could you sort of break that down a little bit for people who are unfamiliar? Because I know there's a lot of opportunities, for example, in like the entrepreneur side of it, right? To be selling and getting the contracts. But could you talk a little bit about, the conditions, what you mean? Like, is it pay discrepancies? Is it hours? Is it uncertainty about the future of that industry?
Yeah, all sorts of things. Pay discrepancy being one, like that industry is not unionized, whereas fossil fuel, a lot of it is unionized, not in the extraction part of it, but more in processing, where we have our refineries and all that, especially here in Texas, in the Houston area and in Beaumont and all that. But, in building a power or building a solar farm, the wages aren't there. It's, people are having to eat in the dirt, and have poor, bathroom facilities and just like the dignity in general. It's not there. It's some of the worst conditions that you can think of, and it's degrading. Whereas in, a refinery, you've got generations working there, and because it was a good job, this guy worked there because his dad worked there and his dad was the foreman, and he's got a nice retirement, and it was a well-respected member of the community, and had health care and all those things. And those things don't exist in these green jobs right now.
No, and I think that's such an important point, and that brings me to something that always gets people really worked up. People, our good lefty audience, but they have a hard time sort of reckoning with like the oil and gas industry, specifically workers in that industry. I'll just say anecdotally, I mean, this was like, coming from, poor working class communities here around Austin, like that was always a hope for a lot of people who came from struggling families. Like, this is the ticket out of poverty, and it's the kind of job I can see myself doing, et cetera. Right. And I think that the people don't recognize the power dynamics at play here. And I think a good example of this is COVID-19, right? Where you see this entire crisis of profitability in oil and gas, and what happens to working people in those industries is they get the threat of job loss. They get the threat of losing their, their pensions, their retirement opportunities. They get the threat of losing their continuity in their life. While there were huge operations to make sure that the CEOs were taken care of, to make sure that the people at the C-suite were taken care of. And it was a frightening, I think, glimpse for folks as to what the future really could look like. If the oil and gas industry were to just sort of progress in a way without a kind of intervention of a green climate plan.
Yeah, that's a lot of what I've been trying to accomplish with the work I've been doing over the last couple of years, and now that this project's going to be focusing on, and that's communicating to like environmentalist groups who historically have just focused on like shutting down a fossil fuel plant, like, yay, big win, and meanwhile the workers are like, what the fuck, and so we're trying to say like, okay, you gotta like center these workers because they're just making enemies of people who should be on your side. Let's figure out how to work together. This is all stick and no carrot. Let's give them somewhere to go. So let's organize these sectors and make them good union jobs instead of and this is also where we get into the issues with just transition is a lot of people use just transition as this thing they throw around without actually like giving examples, and giving something that people could actually trust, that like, is this thing going to exist, or are you just bullshitting me here? Because so far historically it's been nothing but bullshit. So we've got to make it real. We have to make this a tangible thing to where these workers will want to jump over there before their factory closes because the municipality has divested in that power plant, and we got to do that soon because it's happening now.
Yeah, and I just wanted to read a quick bit from the piece here on the just transition, because I think the opening paragraph really highlights a lot of these feelings, specific to Texas, which says Texas's transition to a low carbon economy will have a significant labor, employment, and economic impacts that need to be carefully examined and taken into consideration as Texas strives to meet its climate protection, renewable energy goals. This transition should not come on the backs of the thousands of workers and communities that have powered Texas's economy for decades. To provide support for workers and communities as fossil fuel activities, internal combustion engine manufacturers declines, a multi-stakeholder just transition commission should be established to understand the scope of the transition, supports needed, and potential new industries. And I wanted to sort of ask you to help put some meat on the bones of what this just transition means, right, for us. But I just want to make as a historical note that the transition to fossil fuels, right, as the way that we power society, was a world historical unique moment. And what I mean by that is never before in human histories have societies changed the way that we produce and we interact with each other, and that we that we make energy, that we produce the food that we need, that we get around as quickly as happened during the Industrial Revolution. So when we're talking about shifting that away from, people need to recognize that there's going to need to be a lot of coordination, a lot of hands, a lot of people consulted and moved in certain directions to make sure that this can happen effectively and also without massive harm to communities. But anyways, that's just my side note that I just want to remind our good socialists out there, people who think historically, this is a historic process that's not just going to be solved by like, oh, we have the good morality on our side, right? No, we have to really think about these things. So on that, could you help put some meat on the bones of the just transition concept for folks?
Yeah, so just transition, meaning that as we transition out of this, that these people are not left behind, that we don't have those workers with nowhere to go. We want to give them a place to go and give them a future, and not have to leave a fossil fuel refinery job and then go work at Dollar General after this.
Yeah.
And we have to make sure that as these refineries shut down in places like Beaumont, that those cities aren't left behind as those industries leave, because those are the only industries really sustaining that city at this point. So we have to figure out, more of like what replaces this, and how do these communities who have historically taken the brunt of the offsets of these industries, how do we bring them out of that and help them like not continue to bear that that extreme oppressive burden of the luxuries that everybody else gets to enjoy, so we gotta figure out how we can do this and paint that picture for people so we can get buy-in too, because if they don't feel like they're going to have that just transition, they're going to fight it, and rightly so.
And that'd be such a impossible hurdle to overcome in the first place too, just politically, even if you're just being cynical. If you can get working people to be against significant climate action, well, we already know what the oil and gas industry is going to be looking to do. So yeah, it's dead on arrival.
Yeah, it feels
Absolutely.
like let's go to kind of the other prong, because you need the buy-in from the workers themselves, and then there's the goodies that we all get, like the trains. I think is the thing I'm really interested in. Talk a little bit about the importance of transportation, and in the context of Texas. Like I've been to Dallas. I've ridden the DART system at a very busy St. Patrick's Day to go see Snoop Dogg. It was Snoop Lion at the time. And I was impressed, actually. It was like I had an idea that like you could only get around Texas in like cars, and DART was okay. I mean, I don't know, I'm not an expert on it, but I'm curious just about transportation, about the was it high speed rail or rail anyway? That section.
Yeah, it includes commuter rails and light rail, but also high speed rail. We're already in the works in Texas to build a high speed line from Houston to Dallas, with plans eventually to go from Dallas down through Austin, San Antonio, and all that, and then hopefully eventually make a triangle. And again, that would be work that my union would be involved in. We would be building that. It's electrified lines and all that, and we also organize railroad workers in general. So that's more stuff. This report, while building this, we identified like four sectors, four major sectors that we'd be focusing on, and that's building, including new building, construction, and retrofits, industry, manufacturing, all that stuff, energy production, distribution, and then transportation. And so of those, transportation and building, everybody agreed on. Like it's very easy to see how we all benefit from this. This is that bright new future that we've all been told we will be getting for our entire lives. It's creating new work. It's a lot of good jobs. We can easily, these are already unionized industries. We can easily see those becoming unionized in Texas. The industrial part was a little bit different because there we get into carbon capture and all that, which I know a lot of environmentalists and leftists struggle with. I push back on that, but I've been convinced that like right now it's the best thing we can come up with until we get really invest in R&D and all that stuff. And then energy is where we butted heads, but like transportation, getting people around, especially in Austin, with I-35, trying to get up and down there. We're not going to get less dense up the I-35 corridor, and we know it's not going to get any better on there. So I think most people want the trains. In Austin, we okayed expanding our rail lines here and investing billions of dollars over the next 10 years. And we have existing light rail here, but currently it shares the lines with freight. So it doesn't run that frequently. I used to live in the Crestview area when that Crestview station first opened up, and I was so excited about it, but it only ran until about 7:00 at night. So I was like, okay, well, this is useless to me. I just want to use it to go downtown or drink.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, okay, we'll extend it. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And they're like, until 11. And I was like, oh, okay, well, fuck. I finally used it for the first time in maybe a decade to go to the Gold Cup soccer game the other day. And that was like, it's been around forever. And that was the first time that I'd used it in that amount of time. So we need dedicated rail lines. people in more rural areas are like, well, what about us? And there's a lot of rural space in Texas. Well, like we also have buses. We can have other kinds of rideshare things. There's a lot of last mile stuff that we can come up with. Like we just have to think about this for a second, you know, and just put our heads together. It's like, yeah, I know we can't get a train out to your ranch, you know. We can work on some things.
But I mean, just, you know, thinking about this in a serious way, it's like, you know, this is what infrastructure really means. I mean, Matt Huber, who's a good friend of the show, and he's at Cornell as well. He's a big environmental activist. He makes this point a lot, right? Which is that instead of what a lot of environmentalists do, where they blame people for driving their car to the grocery store or whatever, start asking the question, well, what choices do you have when you leave your house and you want to go and do something? I'm going to be completely honest. In my experience, you know, I have to get in the car, right? It's just like, you know, and you know,
you can only live in a few cities and not have that experience in this country.
But you can build. The point is not to say, well, this is what it has to be forever and always, but it's to recognize that the infrastructure is what drives our decisions, and giving people, you know, better and stronger options. That's where the crux should be, instead of this moralizing. But I mean, it's really you know, exciting to see the support for the trains amongst everybody there, because that's something that you could see there's a desperate need for, and I really think that it could be an easy pickup for a lot of politicians to really start seriously supporting, but you never know. In the last couple of minutes, I did want to ask, because we all know what the politics are. We know what the politics are in Congress. We know what the politics are in the state of Texas. Rough. But you know, if you do have any hope for the future, you have to believe that things can change. And what does give me a lot of hope is the fact that when you talk to everyday people, normal people, working people, they recognize that something needs to be done. But it's hard to imagine what could be done, you know, in a positive way. I always make the point, especially to folks about Texas, that, you know, most voters are defensive. What I mean by that is, like, whenever you bring up politics to most people, they're like, okay, well, that's the thing that makes my life worse, right? Like, that's the thing I have bad experiences of. And to do something different, we have to, you know, inspire people that, you know, politics is an avenue that can change their lives. But without getting into all that big stuff, when you talk to normal folks, when you talk to people in your union, or just people, you know, casually in Texas, when you talk to them about this kind of, what, you know, the things are outlined in this plan, and, you know, how do you sell this idea to folks? How do you sell this kind of future to people who might be a little suspicious of it? They might think that it's pie in the sky, or they might think that it might hurt their industry.
Well, I mean, centering the jobs is the big thing. This has been controversial with some people, but I've stopped using Green New Deal terminology. You know, people who are pretty inoculated to the brand, so like I avoid using that stuff. Even vague promises of good jobs, you know, what does that mean? It just sounds like it even that
you're always bringing the jobs, you know,
right? Exactly.
The Kennedy brothers used to be talking about jobs back then.
Right. Right, but like, what does that look like? You know, if we can give people concrete things and concrete examples, like, this is what we're trying to do, and you know, doing and also saying, like, hey, listen, these jobs are already going away. You know, we've lost 180,000 oil field jobs already in 2020. I saw a lot of those people come through my office being interested in changing over to this career, and then being really bummed out when they see what our starting wages are. So we need to increase that union density. I mean, even in my local, if we were able to provide a better starting package for people, they would have somewhere else to land. And, you know, so people know these jobs are already going away, and we have to make sure that we're saying, we're not here to make that go away any faster. We're here to hopefully figure out a way to find somewhere for us all to land, so that we don't get left behind. We don't get screwed, because we know that those people at the top are going to have that golden parachute, and we're not.
Yeah, and you know, for the people we're talking to, those workers, it's like, you know, what they care about is their wages, their conditions, their hours. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff. It's not as much of an attachment to necessarily like doing the exact same thing that they've always been doing, as much as making sure that their life doesn't, you know, go you know, in the opposite direction than the way it has been. I think it's really exciting. And I think that, like, one thing to point to is that, like, you know, this isn't a handout program either, right? This is, these are programs about building jobs and making sure that working people are taken care of too. Well, is there anything else in the last minute or so that you would want to point out people to from this report that we might have missed? I mean, we talked a little bit about the building retrofitting. That might be something I think that some people sort of struggle with understanding what that process is. But that's a very serious. That addresses a lot of climate change problems, right? Is retrofitting buildings across the state of Texas.
Right, and that includes rooftop solar and all that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I've noticed, especially post freeze disaster in February, was that there's been a divide that's been happening between more of centralized wind and solar power and decentralized wind and solar power. The more centralized solar power and wind power comes with also upgrading the grid, which is part of Biden's plan for the infrastructure bill. Mm-hmm. And then I was thinking about this coming out of the freeze, when they're talking about retrofitting all the generation, the power generation. The people who are responsible for this, the investors who own all this stuff, they're going to make out like bandits. They're just going to get more money off this. They're not going to be held accountable. And that buck is going to get passed on to the consumer through our bills, because they're also, the state of Texas would never raise taxes, even though that would still just fall on us again. So what could we do to offset that while also like strengthening our grid? And, to me, it was pretty clear that you invest in rooftop solar for people's homes and all that, that way. And we could get that out of something like an infrastructure bill. And then that way, not only, we're still investing the same amount of money, but now the end user, the working class, doesn't have to foot the bill, because now they're getting rebates because their property is generating electricity now. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, the rooftop solar and a lot of this green tech on that end isn't organized yet, whereas our grid is organized. So like my union in particular is really backing the more centralized plan and updating the grid, whereas they're pushing us to try and organize solar, but it's not there yet. So they're not really backing that as being part of an infrastructure bill package, which is really unfortunate, because it's we're a little too late on organizing that part. And that if we had that organized, that would really be beneficial at a time like this.
Do you have a perception because I almost got hired before I started doing media by a solar company that was doing this decentralized thing here in New York. Do you get a sense, is just Texas a little bit behind states typically, or do you have a sense nationally like what the situation is?
I think I'm sure we're a little bit behind everybody as far as the more stronger union areas. But I mean, in general, this is the margin is a bit lower. So you don't have the high rates that other commercial installation or other commercial electrical work usually gets, because this is more just installs, a lot of residential and quick kind of put it together stuff. So it's not quite as technical. So, we haven't really gone after it historically, because it's also, we don't historically do a lot of residential work. Like residential electrical work in the United States isn't overly organized in most of the country, unless it's like a place like New York. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty on par with most of the country.
Yeah, and I just wanted to note too, and I was trying to find the numbers just for people who are listening outside of Texas. Like Texas produces an incredible amount of solar energy and wind energy already too. So it's ripe for like mass unionization efforts. But these industries are sort of set up to try to and I think especially because a lot of people have accepted it because it gets to paint itself in green and say like, we're doing good, we don't need to have unionized workforces. And then obviously Republicans aren't itching to try to push unionized contracts with labor either.
Yeah, if you organize, then you'll slow down our ability to green the economy.
And we just have to be really ready for that, because I think that leaves us I think that leaves us in a good spot, because like that's the real threat, right? Because I'm telling y'all, and I've been saying this on the show recently, that it's already becoming a brand name thing, the green stuff, right? And again, this is a moral imperative. We wouldn't be talking about this if we didn't think that climate change was serious and we need to be confronting it. But you can already see there's a kind of shift that there's going to be a lot of money to be made, and they're trying to find a way to see if they can maintain as much of this previous system of hyper exploitation of working people, of many people being left behind, into some future system. And we need to fight as hard as we can to not let that happen and to not get lazy in these fights going forward. Well, Ryan, I really appreciate you spending the time this afternoon to talk to us, and I'll definitely people should be following all this work. I will put links out to read more into this report, and hope to be able to talk to you again sometime in the future.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.
That's right. All right, we're back.
That was great.
That was great.
I need to get a comb in that shot, though. Boy. No, that was fun. I mean, Ryan is the real deal. A lot of people talk about, winning union support in the abstract, but that's somebody who, the union member himself, has been doing the fight and doing it in a place that a lot of people write off.
I think we should have our carbon capture discussion in the post game.
Oh yeah, that could be fun.
The kind of interesting thoughts that poses, because I mean, obviously, of course, everyone knows the difficulty of carbon capture and how it's been elusive, but it'd be nice, especially when you account for types of how refineries are unionized. Like, looking back, there was two industries unionized in my hometown growing up. There were the refinery north of town and the railroads.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to think of other ones, and those are the main ones who, like, people I know who were in unions, and that was kind of it.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, that's the thing. It's just, I don't know why it's been so. I mean, I have some speculation as to why it's been such a blind spot of the environmental left for a long time, but it's it, man. I'm sorry. Someone's got to do it.
Yeah.
Someone that, like, literally, I mean, like, the actual work of it. And if you don't want it to be, I remember I mentioned Grace Blakely when I interviewed her last year. And I didn't mean this as a gotcha, but she makes the point, a lot of socialists had been making the point that there is no solution to climate change under capitalism. And I'm sorry to say that I think that there probably is, but it's going to be really, really damaging for most people, right? And the urgency of that statement, I get why people use it as a slogan, but like, people should remember, like, they're trying to cook up ways to do it right now without transforming the way that we interact with one another. And we have to make sure that they don't get that choice, because they will do it and they'll make a much worse world for the rest of us.
Yeah, that's the big dystopian nightmare, I think, that's on our horizons for our generation, basically.
And you're already, I mean, we got a lot to get to, so I don't want to fix it on too much, but I was watching this glass blowing show on
oh, hell yeah,
on Netflix the other day. It's one of those like competition things, but they had a whole episode where they were like asking these people to make glass pieces that represented climate change. And in every single one, the judges were like, well, where's the hope? And they hated any of the ones that were talking about commodification of nature and stuff like that. But anyone that was just sort of like, well, we can all do collective sacrifice together. Oh, this is great. Because and I bring this up not saying that like that show particularly matters in climate change, but what I'm saying is like, well, that's a reflection of the ideology that's sort of being brought up in like the just everyday American viewer, right, and thinker, right? Is that like, okay, climate change is coming, and that just means things are going to get really shitty, and we're like not going to be able to enjoy things, and our lives are going to get worse, right? And you can already see like them sort of, preparing everybody for what's coming, which is, okay, the rich folks get to continue living their lives. They get to continue exploiting you. But for the rest of us, your quality of life is about to dramatically decline. And we can't accept that.
Yeah.
And the union way is the only way out. But yeah. Well, before we get to Tim Pool, Matt's itching for this. I did want to do a quick update on Peru, and also make a kind of point just on the same thing, is like how the media begins to prepare people for the unthinkable. But just to set the stage, there's all of this horrible nonsense with Keiko Fujimori and her allies basically trying to overturn the election results, very similar to Trump's playbook. And there was a moment where it looked like, they might be able to at least cast enough doubt that there might be an intervention or something like that. But that was pushed back. It was unsuccessful. And, personal shout out to members of the DSA who went there along with a Progressive International to be election observers and to sort of stand strongly when these allegations first came out and say, nope, these were clean and fair elections, right? And Pedro Castillo wins that election and has now been sworn in as president. For people who are unfamiliar, absolutely incredible, radical, new kind of politics, a rural teacher and farmer. From and indigenous too, and people don't mention that enough. Indigenous as well, made a political campaign that brought in the forgotten and those who have been sort of sitting outside of politics in a very clear anti-capitalist, pro-working class message.
And did enough to keep the squishy PMCs in Lima to turn out against Fujimori, which I think is very interesting and a good example and something to aspire to.
Yeah, when we had Austin, who again is just an incredible human being, and we're very lucky to have him on the left. On the show, he noted that, and just so people don't misunderstand us, the cities went for Keiko overwhelmingly, but enough so that members of Nuevo Peru, have gone into coalition government with Castillo, or basically are part of that coalition. So that kind of more urban left has inroads with this new formation under Castillo, and it's an incredibly inspiring moment. And I just want to give people an update over, these first few days of the Castillo administration. One, and this is the thing that everyone's been freaking out about, as he put in Aguero Abelido, who I hope I pronounced his name right. I'm sorry if I didn't, who is an ardent Marxist and a radical and a very serious member of Peru Libre, the party that Pedro Castillo ran under, to become his prime minister and also his chief of staff, which obviously is an incredibly important position that will be important both legislatively and also for his outlook and interactions with people across the country, right? This is a signaling from Pedro that he's not going to forget the people brought into power and they want to go in a different direction. Right. And we'll get to the media freak out in a second, but I just want to give people the facts on the ground to start. Right. And he's created a cabinet that has a lot of different folks in it from, generally a left wing perspective, but from moderate to centrist, more establishment folks to radicals. And has brought in a lot of people, as you mentioned earlier, people from Nuevo Peru into the party as well. Right. And into government as well. So a lot of folks are coming to government. We'll see what happens in these early days. But there was this freak out about the prime minister basically being a Marxist, especially for the financial press, that Pedro Castillo is now showing his true roots as a horrible, evil Marxist communist who's going to steal all your children and do all this kind of stuff. Well, if you could hold up on this 1 second, Matt, I'm sorry. Because I want to do that in a tight second, because I think you can really make a great point here about how the media sort of creates ideas in people's heads. But I just wanted to note too, in addition to putting radicals in the cabinet, he also put in Pedro Franque to be the finance minister, who's very much an establishment kind of politician, not somebody who's particularly radical, in a position that obviously matters a lot to the rich folks, right? That's just what's happening. And I just want people to know that. But if you go to my tweet first, Matt, I just wanted to show okay, so before you bring this up, I know everybody who's listening to this is not, reading Peruvian newspapers and following Peruvian news very closely. You might have heard about it on this show. You might be interested in it because of that. But, the way that we all sort of go through our lives, you hear about things in other countries when something big happens, right? And then you sort of have a general understanding from that, right? And it's important to note that because this is how they do this kind of really nasty manipulation, right? So if you're just a person who is not watching the show, you heard, okay, there was a big election in Peru and they elected a left-wing person, right? What starts to go through your head when you see these headlines? If you pull up my tweet here, Matt, these are I just typed in Pedro Castillo, Peru. This is the first thing that come up. Leftist political novice sworn in as Peru's president. Peru's democracy is at a breaking point. Foreign policy. Peru's mining executives anxious as Castillo's left-wing administration begins.
I mean, that seems like good news to me.
Yeah. And this last one is Pedro Castillo's presidency already doomed. If you see something like that, right? And again, you're just a casual person, and look, these are, foreign policy magazine, right? Those are the guys who do the real reporting and pay attention to these things. If that's the kind of stuff that's being fed to you, right? I don't think that everybody has the time to like debunk what's going on in every country constantly. I just wanted to make this point, not that it's new to anybody, but this is just a very clear example of the stuff that, we argue on the left, that, there is a lot of manufacturing of consent. And it should also be noted, just as a part of the as a part of the recap, that there has been a push from the new mining minister of Peru to say that we want there to be a renegotiation of what happens with the profits from the riches of our country. Again, an extremely reasonable thing. But of course, if you are an unreasonable capitalist who makes all of your money off of exploiting other people, you can hear the alarm bells ringing.
The way that they shriek at things like that, and it just fucks up the entire world. Right, for the last fucking century.
I mean, and it's disgusting too. These people have no right to ask that this again, and this is I don't have it up for you. I just want to. I'm gonna send this to you real quick, Matt. This piece, just because the language, that's coming from Pedro Castillo's government on this stuff is so mild. It's almost like you almost feel as a leftist like you need to be urging them on a little bit.
Yeah, sellouts.
Yeah, let me see. Higher taxes are the main worry we have now, said Pablo de la Flor, the head of the National Society of Mining, Oil and Energy, which represents mining companies. The expectation on the side of industry is to clarify the doubts we still have about the sector. The administration has said it will work with all players in the mining sector to create a new deal that will address social profitability. Newly installed Minister of Energy and Mines, Ivan Moreno, told Reuters that this means mines should not only make money for private companies that generate tax revenue, but should also help the population through improved infrastructure, respect for indigenous communities, and better environmental protection. And then this absolute pig, de la Flor, says social probability is already an inherent part of the industry, which is complete nonsense. What's been going on in Peru, specifically with the mining industry, have been egregious examples of cruel treatment of workers, clear ignoring of any kind of environmental concerns that the people around there have. And that's why people showed up and voted for Pedro Castillo there. Yeah, I mean, it's despicable, and it's just this is clear in front of your eyes. I know a lot of people will comment on this and they'll say like, "Well, is the coup coming? Is the coup coming?" I think we won. I understand why people make that kind of comment, but let's not get so detached that we just make comments like that, because that's obviously is a disaster, and you don't want to be right about those kind of things. Right. But this is how they lay the seeds to do extreme damage. If it doesn't even have to be something as overt as that. That's how you undermine a presidency. That's how you prevent there to be investment. Remember, Pedro Castillo became the president. He doesn't control all of the resources in the country, right? The bourgeoisie, the ruling class, has the ability to take money out of the country. That's what they do, right? And you start to make excuses like this in the international media, right? And that sort of lays like the groundwork for mass disinvestment policies from the ruling class, the rich and powerful, right? That's the damage that they're interested in doing. It doesn't always have to be that kind of overt thing, and it's extremely damaging. And I just think people should recognize that.
Yeah, man. So many people from our generation, I think, when you decide, hey, I'm going to use the internet to try to figure out which publications can help me inform myself about the world. The Economist, right? Like it's The Economist and stuff like that. And it's like, that gives you a great veneer of nuance and all that stuff. But ultimately, and I don't know if any of these examples from The Economist, but this is just the waters you're swimming in, right? And it makes you defend horrible shit just because some mining executives are upset
mad that they might like not be able to pollute the water around their industries.
and
right?
so
I mean, give me a break.
and so you take completely anti-democratic attitudes based on what you thought was information, like good unbiased information from like trusted business sources, right? And that's what it gets you. It amplifies that sort of shrieking into all of this rationale that is just sort of obfuscates the reality, which is this is greed and a system that's the euphemisms like concerns about the sector and things like that. I just
No, it's ridiculous. And act like, oh yeah, they already pay their social, what's the word, social prosperity or whatever.
Yeah,
It's
well,
just-
that's like a classic American Enterprise Institute argument, right? Like capitalism already does that for you.
Yeah, exactly. And I just say, like, to all the people who are listening to this show, right, this is the kind of stuff to be aware of, and this is the kind of stuff that you can personally be debunking to people in your circles and stuff like that, right? Because it's a very effective tool that they have, and that's the kind of thing I think I'd be more worried about debunking if you're trying to help out friends and comrades in other countries. Is look for this kind of stuff, because this is how they start to flex their muscles.
Right. So I have. Let's do. We're gonna go to Bumsteer, folks. And then I don't know. We need to get that
Good,
guy. Yeah. This is my.
We had a
cow.
cartoon for a little bit. I don't know where he put it.
We do. I'm just bad at labeling things on my gaming rig, to be completely frank. But so Tim Pool has been written up by the Daily Beast, an article that I found very amusing. Let me share it with all of you. It's called "How Coward and Phony Tim Pool." That's a quote from former employees of his. How coward and phony Tim Pool became one of the biggest political YouTubers on the planet. Now, so where to start with Tim Pool? This article does a pretty good job of highlighting that he's basically like he's one of the better guys at taking the center left pose and using it to just affirm the right wing. Tim Pool comes from Occupy Wall Street. Actually, I think he was on Majority Report back in the day.
Wow.
He was on Occupy Wall Street, making a name for himself because he basically had streaming equipment and the capabilities to be down there. And if first mover, early bird gets the worm sort of thing. This article does a great job of tracing how he quickly outwore his welcome when it came to the Occupy activists by simultaneously taking the pose that I'm an objective journalist and I have to put everything up even though it might get people arrested, and also having the pose of I'm part of this movement of Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah. I'm going to speak for it.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a few amusing things here. So one is I can confirm some of the stuff in this. Well, not directly, but so Tim has this tweet here that I've always find very amusing because it includes it's sort of a reference to my interaction with Tim. He's getting upset about Becca Lewis, who's a sort of YouTube ethnographer. And Tim is very self-important in the middle of a thread here. While many journalists have quit, gone to PR, or capitulated, I am focusing my growth and resources on costly, low profitability field reporting. From launching Vice News, being regularly inside ABC News HQ to NYC, to now running several businesses, I tell you this is involved expert and insider as a member of ONA and past speaker at Columbia, NYU, and ONA events. So I saw him at NYU. I have not been able to find out if there was another speaking engagement he had there, because if you Google Tim Pool NYU, you get that tweet and then my tweet telling the story I'm about to tell, which is that Tim Pool did speak at NYU. It was at in a small classroom, about 30 people, for video game theory. And now I am someone who can absolutely defend humanitarian education or education in the humanities that would include video game theory. That was a great class. Homo Ludens, I forget who wrote that, but a great book on humankind's our need to play as a way to interact in the world. It's actually great. A great class. The day that Tim Pool came in was not one of the best days. And I just want to play this clip because this actually is very similar to my experience of that class, which is Tim Pool came in and just talked about his gear, which is, again, the only selling point he had for Occupy, that he could do a live stream. And here he is talking about Google Glass. And I think he might have...
Oh, that's so good.
Can you tell us how you use them on the field, and how can the journalists use them?
The key benefit to Glass is that you're always in the field. The point of wearing it is that no matter where I'm at, I can take a picture or video instantly. So I can catch anything that happens, breaking news. And then more importantly is that it's the opposite of a distraction. It's totally out of my frame of mind. So when I'm running a video or if I'm shooting a live shot, I can totally forget about the camera.
So yeah, anyway, my video game theory course cost about $500 per class period, and that's basically what I got. Like bring a
I got a camera on my face.
Bring an external exercise brick. Yeah. And there's this amazing, I need to bring this up too. We might go a little bit long, but Tim Pool, Google Glass, the way it was written up by the tech press. So this is how he started building an audience, right? Just this inanity. Like Google, how Vice's Tim Pool used Google Glass to cover Istanbul. And the funny thing about these, that's detailed in this Daily Beast article, is he goes to these places for like Vice News and stuff, Ferguson also, and he can't do basic reporting. He's incompetent to go up and speak to people. Basically, like he's either, and he has not a whole lot of interest in either. Oh yeah, well shoot, I can't find the thing, but it's basically him at Vice's newsroom, which I've also been to. Actually, I worked for Vice News for a little bit. Again, full disclosure.
You were just following his.
I know.
Man. Matt was so inspired. Matt was so inspired by Tim Pool. Come on, man, admit it. Everything.
I've been carrying external battery packs in both back pockets ever since that class period.
Matt's wearing Google Glass right now.
So there's a great sort of takedown of Tim Pool here that kind of goes into how he basically. So what happens with right wingers, I think, is they get tired of sniffing their own farts with media, and which is everyone does this, right? Like I was there with, I guess the Jon Stewart and NPR days, 2010. Yeah, and you want to get get a sense of what else is out there. Tim Pool is there for the people who want to think that they're getting something different, but really it's just right wing.
The same thing,
the exact same thing. So I have this here. This is from Jose Not a J, who did this really great video called "How Tim Pool Keeps His Audience Ignorant." And I mean, there's a lot of great stuff in here about. Actually, we're just going to play some of that about Tim Pool and the type of dumb calls he's made. Here's one. And again, like he takes this pose like he's again like the conversion narrative. He used to be on the center and now. But here's some of the things he was saying. Tell you what I think can happen. Oh, hold on. That's a little bit quiet, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't hear.
Cheating. I think Trump's going to landslide. I think Trump would have had a landslide no matter what. I think the polls are fake. And I think what's happening now is Trump's going to win, and they're going to say, but he didn't really win. No amount of mail-in ballots will matter. If Trump gets 537 or 36 or even 538, every single electoral vote. We all know Joe Biden will lose. Like, let's be real, man. As I've stated 1,000,001 times, Donald Trump's going to win. The Republicans are going to sweep.
Again, like he acts like he's just reading this news.
Yeah, he's getting the tea leaves.
And it really traces like one thing the only thing I think is worth emphasizing about January 6th at this point is that the people were there on a lie about the election. They were lied there that Trump won. I mean, some of them probably knew Trump was lying about the election. We're down to steal shit, right? But to the extent that like anybody thinks that, like, there's a massive problem in this country with people being misled about the just who wins an election. And I think you look around the world, I'm not comfortable saying that America is exceptional, that can't do something here, especially after 2000. Like, right, like this sort of bullshit about constitutionality and elections, like it's all a farce. This is a power play. And like if Trump had, like that's the thing is like, there's a kernel of truth where people look at it that's farcical because Trump just does not have this sort of discipline that he can, but I mean, he got like AGs and shit on board to try, but let's just play this this from Jose Not a J, this a longer clip here because I also want to. There's a few quotes in this article about how Tim's really dumb, and I think that's also key to point out. Like, he's a guy who has surfed by basically being on this like cutting edge where Google's going to send him because he's an Occupy Wall Street guy, and Vice News is going to let him in, and ABC News, and all these people, like my fucking video game theory professor, put him forward as some sort of expert, and he's very smart about not fucking that up by like basically owning what he's about. But his instincts show
he portrays it. He takes the mask off all the time.
Exactly.
I mean, we did the one where he was talking about the King of France or whatever, and telling everybody to move into the woods, which apparently is some wonderland of wheat and honey.
Yeah, exactly. Why didn't everybody else do that? Here's a little bit more from Jose Not a J, where Tim gets ahead of himself a little bit and ahead of like the sort of people who would tell him just cool it a little bit on how much you're pumping this story, Tim.
This lawsuit, which would supposedly overturn the results in several states Trump had lost during the election, Tim got on the ground floor with this story before it had been thoroughly undermined by the mainstream media. On Twitter, Tim expressed patience on this revelation, claiming that before making any statements on this new case, we should wait and see how the Supreme Court ruled on it. That same day, he released a video titled, "Texas Just Nuked Democrats from Orbit with SCOTUS Lawsuit Calling Election Unconstitutional." Because Tim was lurking late at night, this video came out early in the life cycle of this story, before the mainstream media had torn this story to pieces. And blissfully ignorant of the real possibilities of this working out, they were actually really low, Tim is breathless in describing it.
They're probably going to win this one, and this is huge. This is going to change the outcome of the election. In my opinion, we'll see.
A few days later, though, when the Supreme Court dismissed the case, Tim takes a different tone in the video. Texas GOP calls for new union of states as SCOTUS denies
that was awesome.
Election.
That was West who
It's
said that.
not over.
I'll tell you, it is not over until Joe Biden is in the White House, and even then, it might not end. They don't get it. They don't understand what's happening.
Tim went out on a limb for this story, and he got burnt. It ended up going nowhere and doing nothing, like every attempt Trump and his team have made to change the results of the election. But Tim can't have his audience walking away from his videos feeling dejected and defeated, and so he pushes the deadline of when things will be over to never. Things will never be over. Trump supporters will never accept this election, and soon we're going to have a civil war. Tim's role as copium dealer should be understood as broadly anti-left and specifically pro-Trump. That is to say, he's more likely to produce content that attacks left-wing social views and politicians, and more likely to defend right-wing ones as they relate specifically to Donald Trump. That isn't to say he never does the opposite of either of those things, it's just highly unlikely he'll either title a video or spend most of his time praising the left or criticizing Donald Trump. What's quite...
And, one thing the Daily Beast article goes into is, like, there's reported, like, Tim Pool actually saying, ever since he came out voting for Trump, his numbers have just been massive. And I mean, I think it's difficult with someone like Tim Pool because to me, it seems like just super dumb guy. But not to fucking Vice News, not to ABC News, not to NYU or all these places that had him speak about stuff. So he has this massive following of like basically tech authoritarians, frankly, that just want to like see the left shit on, but not as sort of distasteful in as distasteful way as like Crowder or somebody does. That's just like explicit in their right wing affiliations. And like, there's a reason for that. Cause like it's that stuff isn't appealing. Like right wing ideology isn't appealing. Like you can sell people on right wing outcomes much more easily, I think, if you aren't doing that shit.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think the way that you framed it at the beginning is perfect. It's just like he wants people who consider themselves to be conservatives to feel like, oh, they're getting someone from the left or someone, someone who's not swimming in the same waters as us to validate everything that you think is true. I mean, that's the role. And marketing, it's not too bad. But the thing, and the thing that's so funny about these kind of people, though, is he's like able to control who interacts with him directly to prevent him from being exposed on most of the stuff, which is why it's worthwhile to come at him.
Yeah, which is also, I want to I want to put a shout out. This guy's name is Moonlord, I guess.
Moonlord.
I don't know. That's what people were tagging the surfs and stuff and calling this guy Moonlord. But Moonlord is the guy who is trying to get through to Tim about like, hey, if the king is like hoarding all the grain, hypothetically, and saying like, you have to starve to death because I'm the king and I need this grain. That maybe you could step in and do something. This guy's name is Go ahead. This guy's name is Moonlord. I just want to say that real quick. And
I just wanted. I want you to keep going. I just think it's actually so funny that he's like learned his role. That he's basically become like Edmund Burke. Like not in like his ability to produce. Like basically like, oh no, like anyone coming after the monarchy is like extremely dangerous, right?
Honestly, we'll play both these clips because that's like a genuine like representation of Cori Robbins' thesis of conservatism, the reactionary mind, tracing it back to Evan Burke. Here's that part.
There's a homeless guy outside and he's like, let me sleep in your house. And I'm like, no, you are causing my suffering. It is your fault. Then activists show up and they're like, the only reason this man is suffering is because Tim Pool won't let him in his house. It's like, no, the dude is responsible for his own shelter, man.
To a point, but the French Revolution.
No, literally to period.
Well, but if there's a monarch that's hoarding all the materials so that the people are starving and suffering, it is the monarch's fault.
Why?
Because he's by force keeping them from their stuff or their community has produced.
So can they like leave?
No.
I mean,
is the king going, you can't even leave?
They made the
yes.
shit.
That's a core tenet of feudalism.
That's also true, yeah.
Like you can't leave the land. You belong to the land, and if you try to leave, they will hunt you down and bring you back. That's why, Tim, people ended up revolting against that system and chopping his brutally ending that system. Like, what the hell is he talking? I mean, I know it's absurd from the get-go, but it's just like, even as a thought experiment, historically, it just doesn't work.
Well, it's already just injustice because he literally said, the question was great, like the stuff you made. Like, yeah, I made this fucking bridge. I made this windmill. I made this all this feudal shit that we're using to produce stuff. I'm your miller. Like, I'm not just going to leave all this stuff I've been doing because, like, I fucking built that, actually. It wasn't your ass sitting on, like, sitting in silk pajamas in a castle. Like, so I'm going to stay here and I'm going to like actually want to share in this. And then also the other point is, no, you can't, you'd be hunted down by a fucking knight. And then to the extent you could get to another.
Tim Pool's watching Braveheart. Why don't they just leave?
To the extent you could get somewhere else, they'd look at you like an outsider and be very, very suspicious, which is probably something Tim also proved. So yeah. Anyway, here's another instance. This is, I guess, when Destiny was on, where this is very revealing to the point where I think Tim knows he needs to protect. He knows the game he's playing a little bit, and he needs to protect himself from being seen as just a Trump partisan. Because Moon God or Moon Lord or whatever the fuck his name is. By the way, bro, if Tim Pool, if you go south, get in touch with me. I'd love to talk. But if like. He gives away something about Tim Pool's audience that Tim does not want. It literally covers for in real time here, unless maybe I'm wrong.
With this audience, I notice I don't want to be too general, but when I start to dump on Trump, if I just start to insult him, people get really angry at the other stuff I say in the conversation. If I don't trash Trump,
I don't think that's true.
I've noticed a trend because a lot of people that watch this show seem to love him.
Well, you're looking at the comments.
I look at the comments.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the text comments.
Yep, that's why a lot of the comments are making fun of me.
With this audience,
like,
I know.
That's pretty good.
All of Tim Pool's videos are very highly marked up on. So it's not like people are going on to troll Tim. Trump people love you, Tim. They love you.
Yeah.
Just admit it, buddy. So yeah, that's our Tim Pool stuff. Is there anything else I wanted? Oh, it is funny just to mention his incompetence Ferguson particularly. Like basically, it says like none of the residents had any time for his questions, and he was looking up how some other YouTuber was growing an audience like on his phone the entire time. And people were saying like was incompetence, and now it looks kind of like narcissism. But what do you know about the New Yorker's fact checking, David? Do you have like their reputation?
I mean, fact checking in general is a pretty.
Of course, yes. As a former fact checker, it is ridiculous. It's all political, and the facts.
I mean, it's definitely a place. I don't know. I mean, it's definitely a place that they're doing it. If that's what you're asking, it's definitely a place where there's departments of people. If somebody says something, they call them. They check to make sure things that are published in the magazine aren't just made up.
Yeah, it's a place that fetishizes it, is how I would say. Like that's when we were talking about that age of like the Economist, like the New Yorker was like the fact check paper. Well, I wanna just share this. This is from an article called the streamer. I don't know, some bullshit about the streamers who are going to save everybody. But the very bottom thing here is there is a correction. An earlier version of this article included a quotation from Tim Pool concerning Vice News' coverage in Ferguson. The quotation has been removed because it contains several errors. And the reason is like Tim Pool completely shat the bed when he had to go do real reporting, and then lied about like that he was out there doing real reporting, but some like Jesse Jackson interview was taking all the hits away, right? Just complete like bullshit. So that's the nature
so
of that
awesome,
New York
man.
correction.
Yeah, I mean, not to fetishize all those guys hanging out in the New York, but like Tim just sort of falling ass backwards into this thing where he like actually is going to be accountable for the things that he's saying. Like somebody's going to just verify it.
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
very funny to me.
To me, it's also funny to get the New Yorker to have to retract something. I mean,
that is. I mean, well, the thing is, like, it would be a great troll, right? If, like, if Tim Pool wasn't just so full of himself, such that he thinks that, like, he actually is the one true journalist.
Yeah,
it would actually be a very hilarious thing to just get the New Yorker to just constantly have to pull retractions for just things that you pulled out of thin air.
Yeah, this was the article: the live streamers who are challenging traditional journalism. So. Yeah.
Would they like to do it? The New Yorker loves to profile people like Tim Pool. Not regularly, not all the time, but when it comes to alternative media, right? That's the fun one to do because they could sort of say like, oh, this is something different. But look, they're a little crazy and they don't really know what's going on. Similar things that just happened.
Look at this, the lamestream media. Look at all this press, the lamestream. Like, honestly, like these guys, like Ben Shapiro, the cool kids philosopher, like they're part of the problem that they're monetizing.
Well, it's because that kind of media isn't threatening to them, is what I'm trying to say, right? I mean, it's like it's still in the same universe because at the end of the day, we all basically it just like cements their status as the truth tellers, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's enough for Tim Pool. I mean, there's some very funny stuff elsewhere, but
I don't know how much more swimming I can do.
No, that's it. All right, so we'll patrons, we will see.
Well, before we go to the post game, I just wanted to know really quickly for people who want an in-depth conversation on this. I did about half an hour plus on it yesterday during the Griscom stream, but there was just really exciting news that the NLRB has said as much that Amazon cheated undeniably during the union election earlier this year, right? And again, I spent a lot of time just sort of going through the actual facts of the matter because it's not set in stone. There's not going to be a second election or anything like that. But basically, for people who followed these things, they're basically saying this is pretty certain that if people want to hold a second election, they can do it because the account is extremely damning. As we covered on this show, Amazon set up illegally a post office box in an area that they had been surveilling. But don't worry, Matt, because if you're worried about the cameras watching to see who is voting and who's not voting, Amazon did put over an Amazon branded tent over the illegal post box that they installed to collect ballots, right? I mean, it's just so clear what it was. It was an attempted intimidation. And there are other things too that the NLRB noted, including things like passing out anti-union paraphernalia to workers while on site and in front of their bosses and their supervisors. We all know what the implication is there. Are you taking this, or are you going to vote against this? And there will be retaliation, right? I noted yesterday, though, that I think this is a really exciting thing. It's a positive thing, but there are some limitations, and one of them is that there should be financial penalties for this, right? Amazon will continue to cheat because they know that they can use their leverage and their power to sway elections in their favor. And then afterwards, 6 months later, after the cameras have left, oh, the NLRB said this election was bad, right, and was unfair, right? And then people have to restart and reset constantly. Amazon is making a decision to break the rules because they're not worried about what happens if they get caught, right? So things like, I'm not trying to be down or sour on it. It's a positive thing. And it's a good shift that the NLRB is involving itself at all, because under the previous administration, I don't think that would happen. Right. So that's good. And it creates an opportunity. And I think if people want to go forward again, they absolutely should. And they'll have our support, because it's a beautiful and important fight. And I think they can win, and they should win. But I just want people to know the facts of the matter and just understand, what we're up against, because Amazon did those illegal things, but there's a lot of other things that Amazon does and will continue to do that are going to influence people's ability to express their desire about whether or not they want to form a union, that Amazon is perfectly able to do legally. And they do it. Right. And, just knowing the playing field is important, but incredible news. And it's a really exciting thing to be able to hold up and say, Amazon's a cheater. Jeff Bezos is scared, and they're trying to do everything that they can because they realize the power and the danger to their system, right, that an organized working class has. And that's something that you should take comfort and joy in.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, cheat a union drive and then blast up into space. Good job, Jeff.
No, and as people were saying in the chat, Jeff Bezos thanking the Amazon workers for sending him into space is probably one of the best pieces of pro-union propaganda we could ever produce.
And,
so we need to clip that and use that all the time.
It's so funny because, like, I'm trying to figure out, if I was like his speechwriter, what he says, because it's like there's no defending it in words, his position, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, you have to do some kind of nod to the workers, but that is a massively, like, world historically brutal exploitative relationship that you have with those people. Yeah. Oh, good old Jeff. At least it's our space cowboy.
Little Jeff, our little space cowboy. Hope he's safe and tucked in tonight.
Yeah.
Well, y'all, I think we're gonna be heading over to the post game. We got a lot of fun stuff in there for y'all, and we'll be taking questions from the chat as well. Do we have anything specific to plug?
I'm not sure. We're gonna get into this. We're getting into this carbon capture conversation. Maybe let's talk about nuclear a little bit too. Maybe we'll get into some of that.
Get
stuff.
me in trouble.
Yeah, folks, we'll see patrons. We'll see you in about 25 minutes or so.
I look forward to, and we'll be talking with Cori Pine too. That bonus episode will be coming out for patrons. So again, if you haven't already, join us on the other side, patreon.com/leftreckoning. We'd be happy to see you there.
Peace out, folks.